Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call to order the April 2nd, 2019 regular meeting of the Planning and Zoning Board. Morgan, would you like to start us with a roll call?
Raymond Layton.
Here.
Sonny Aluzo.
Here.
Karen Beatty.
Here.
Don Black.
Here.
Willie Newkirk Sr. Carol Williams.
Present.
Pat Doherty.
Here.
Jeff Midget.
Here.
Jerry Walker.
Here.
Marshall Ballard. We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. Seeing as we have no minutes, we will blow right past that item on our agenda and go right to new business. And the first item of new business is an informational session for the New Bern Redevelopment Commission. And I think our Director of the Development Services is going to deliver that to us. So at this time, I'll turn it over to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. Tonight I'll be, the presentation will be in two parts. We have two separate items on the agenda. I'll pause and I'll take some questions after the first section, and then we'll move on to the second section, which we'll be asking for a vote of the Commission. So tonight we're talking about our newly formed redevelopment area that we have in the city. Some of you have already heard some of this, some of you haven't, so I'll just start with a brief introduction on the law, what the Redevelopment Commission is, what they can and can't do, and we'll move into the meat of the matter later on tonight. So urban redevelopment areas, very simply outlined on this slide. They are areas that are targeted specifically for redevelopment by local governments. They are enabled under the state statute. They have a lot of powers, a lot of authority. We'll be going over a little of those later on. Most important part of what this is improving neighborhoods, improving areas, and attracting, eventually attracting private investment back into areas of towns and cities that have historically have seen a lot of disinvestment, essentially. In order to move forward, we need to create a plan. We'll be talking about that a little later, but right now we're at step one in the process, which is essentially defining the area where we will be planning. When we create that plan, everything inside the plan, every action that we take as a redevelopment commission has to be consistent with the approved redevelopment plan. So what do? One of the most important things that these urban redevelopment areas is through the commission, they act as essentially a sounding board for communities, identify issues, build consensus around solving those issues, create policies and goals to address them specifically. As I stated earlier, there is a variety of tools available to these redevelopment commissions that are not available to other groups or other planning and zoning board of adjustments. Essentially, they have the same power as the Board of Aldermen, a little less, but in a very smaller geographic area. And I'll say it again, it does, creating a redevelopment commission and a redevelopment plan, there are investors that see that as a plus in a community. They understand that there is a partner in an area that they're looking to invest, a partner that will help them through that process and eventually make some money. What are the steps to creating an urban redevelopment area? First thing is to form a redevelopment commission. That has been done already. The commission was formed last May by the Board of Aldermen, was populated a few months thereafter. The next step is defining the boundaries that we have to plan for. We're talking about that tonight. The planning board will then qualify the boundary. Again, that'll be the item on the agenda, essentially approving and giving the redevelopment commission the authority to go forth and plan for the redevelopment of the area. After that, the Board of Aldermen passes a resolution confirming all the findings and the boundaries. We have another public hearing in front of the board, and that resolution is filed with the state. After that, the redevelopment commission goes forth and creates a plan. So after this boundary tonight, our redevelopment commission, which we have been actively working for the past 6 months or so to create this plan, will actually have the authority to do so. But we've been dovetailing through this process, understanding the importance of it. It will go through a series of approvals once the plan is created. It'll go through some public comment period back before this board for comment and more presentation, more public comment, and again, ultimately to the Board of Aldermen. After that step, after the plan is created and approved by the Board of Aldermen, we can begin officially implementation. What is a redevelopment commission or urban redevelopment area? What kind of things can you do? Well, the first step there is review and integrate recent planning efforts. We are fortunate enough to have two pretty robust planning efforts behind us. We had the Renaissance Gateway planning effort that was completed in 2014. And we also have the CNI planning effort that created a very robust redevelopment plan for this area. That was completed in 2016. Okay. So a lot of our data that we need, a lot of issues that we need to address, they've been studied very well. We have a very firm grasp on the issues facing the community, and a lot of places don't have. A lot of places don't have that kind of luxury to have that much effort by some pretty high-quality professionals that were working with us and the community at large that we've been talking with for the past 4 to 5 years. Data collection is extensive for our planning efforts, existing land use conditions, vacancies, how much development activity, the code enforcement, that's minimum housing code, that's nuisance abatement, tall grass, junk-like conditions, crime data. This is a very data-driven plan. I'll be presenting some of that a little later on. Community needs and assessments and surveys. A lot of that work has been done in the past by our chair of the Redevelopment Commission, Theresa Lee, standing behind me. She led a year-long community needs and assessment survey under the CNI planning activity. So we have a great amount of data for the community as far as health, wellness, needs, wants, issues, things like that. Residential market analysis, all these things we have at our fingertips right now. Summarize roles and responsibilities. The Redevelopment Commission, we are recommending a boundary. We're doing that tonight. We'll be creating a plan and we'll be implementing the plan. The Planning Board qualifies that boundary, and in the future, when we bring the plan forward again, we'll recommend approval, hopefully, or with changes, of that plan to the Board of Aldermen. Public's involved every step of the way, and the Board of Aldermen essentially approves the plan after a long series of public input. So what's a redevelopment commission? A redevelopment commission can be a governing body, i.e. the Planning Commission, Board of Aldermen, or it can be a standalone independent commission. The city of New Bern has chosen to make a standalone independent commission that has been appointed by the Board of Aldermen. They can have 5 to 9 members. We have 9, and they can serve up to 5-year terms. Just to address Mr. Midge's concern, and this does come up when we talk about these types of things in redevelopment commission areas. There's a very strict conflict of interest that's outlined in state statute that anyone on the commission cannot own any property or be involved in any kind of development projects inside that boundary, and the only exception to that is their primary residence. What kind of tools do we have available to us? As a redevelopment commission, as I said earlier, there are a lot of tools available to implement the redevelopment plan. They can acquire parcels, including can apply eminent domain for only blighted parcels only, and that is a process unto itself. Can simply not just the commission cannot simply just point to a parcel and take it by eminent domain. There is a process by which it needs to be determined to be blighted beforehand. They can clear areas for demolition, and building removal, can make site improvements, get into the development game, site preparation, site improvements, can enter into contracts for construction, demolition, and repair, so can build homes, repair homes, can own, lease, or rent property. Doesn't have to be just residential, can be also commercial and office. Can get into the financing game, can provide loans. Those loans don't have to be linked to specific job creation numbers like other types of economic development tools or loan programs that are available in these types of areas. Can provide matching grants again, grants for rehabilitation, can make loans, and can sell property through competitive bidding procedures.
Can I interrupt?
Sure, absolutely.
I'm trying to make sure who can make loans.
The Redevelopment Commission.
The commission.
The 9-member
Okay.
board, yes, sir. Again, can sell property. There are restrictions associated with selling property. They are outlined in state statute. Can also encumber parcels with covenants to uphold redevelopment goals. So if there is a redevelopment plan that asks for a specific improvement for a parcel and that parcel is conveyed, that conveyance can have along with it some kind of restrictions to make sure that element of the plan is met. And can issue bonds. The Redevelopment Commission can issue bonds. All in furtherance of the plan. So you need a plan, and everything that I just outlined has to be consistent with implementing some part of the plan. What it doesn't do, two things, probably a few more, but the biggest one is it doesn't guarantee any kind of state or federal funding. It's either grant funded, local government funded, or start to work up a portfolio where you can self-fund. And it does not allow for private sale for non-monetary consideration, so they cannot just give away property. There are limited exceptions. Much like the city can essentially give away property for a public good. That public good is often outlined in state statute. Could be many things, but for us, it's affordable housing. So you'll see the city will, and we have an item on the agenda coming up next Tuesday, to donate 12 lots to Habitat Humanity. So the city can do that to further the public good of offering affordable housing. The Redevelopment Commission can do the same thing. I said it 3 times already. Everything we do has to be consistent with the plan. And if you do any research in redevelopment plans and redevelopment commissions across the state, you will find almost every single one of them is different. So you'd be surprised at the diversity of issues and how redevelopment commissions address those issues. No two plans are the same.
So excuse me, what's decided in one area does not necessarily create a precedent for another area then, right?
Absolutely correct, yes, sir.
Okay.
Yep, that's exactly it. The commission's created to address the issues and concerns of a very specific area. So before I go on to the next steps, do you have any questions about that? This was just the kind of get sped up a little bit on what we're doing, but now we're going to move into the boundary section. Because that is 2 items, right? Okay.
Does the city attorney serve for this commission as well, or is there a separate?
That hasn't been determined yet.
Okay.
The city attorney is not a redevelopment commission attorney. And
Right.
It's a pretty unique set of skills.
Sure.
We've been working closely with UNC School of Government, Tyler Mulligan, who is a redevelopment attorney, and I actually should be there tonight up there in Chapel Hill getting my final certificate for the Community Development Academy, but I could not make it for various reasons, this being one of them. So yeah, I mean, I talk to him a lot. Ideas, sometimes I think they're crazy and they've been done 100 times before.
Sure.
So he's been working with us, but as we nail down the plan itself and the final format, we'll have to get answers to those questions.
Okay.
If we need to actually have a legal review of it by an attorney who's very familiar with redevelopment commission. So
Okay. Thank you.
well aware of the issue there. Okay, so I think we move on to item 2 essentially. We okay?
Yeah.
Mr. Chair? Okay.
Are we ready to move to item 2? Is that what I heard you say? Okay.
All right, so there's some steps in the process. We created a redevelopment commission, and now we're at, what's the boundary? State statute gives us 4 criteria to create a redevelopment district boundary. 1, it has to be a blighted area. The language in state statute that determines what a blighted area is that at least 60% of the buildings in the area have to be essentially blighted, and the definition for blighted is about 4 inches of legal thing. So you imagine what a blighted building looks like, a deteriorated and dilapidated, that's what 60% of them have to look like. You can make a non-residential redevelopment area. That is strictly commercial. That's where a predominance of the structures in your area are commercial in nature. Or it can be a rehabilitation, conservation, and reconditioning area. I'll get into a little more of that. I'll get into that later. Or it can be a combination thereof. So a lot of people think, well, it's a blighted area, and you can just move forward with that. But we don't fit in the boundary that we're proposing tonight. 60% of those structures are not blighted for various reasons. Our numbers are about 22%, but you have to keep in mind that the cities have been in a very active demolition program for the past 10 years, and we've torn down almost 300 homes. So that number, as you clear blighted structures, you create vacant lots, and the statute really doesn't contemplate issues like that, so we don't fit into that. We're obviously not commercial, but we do make a very solid case for a rehabilitation, conservation, and reconditioning area. And what does that mean? This is an excerpt from the state statute. And what we're asking tonight is that the Planning Commission find that the area that we're talking about is subject to a clear and present danger, that in absent of municipal action to rehabilitate, conserve, and recondition the area, it will become, in the reasonably foreseeable future, a blighted area. So this language, rehabilitation, conservation, and reconditioning, recognizes that it's equally as important to get ahead of the blight game before it hits you.
Prevention, huh? Prevention, huh?
Absolutely, yes, sir. So this is what the boundary looks like. It'll be very familiar. This is also called the C&I planning boundary, and was also the boundary that we used for the Renaissance planning effort. It works. It's been approved. And it's the area generally bound to the south by the Trent River. Heads up First Avenue along Gaston. Heads out west by Garfield, up Clark, up to the tracks, and down Bern, generically speaking. It does go a lot deep off of those, off of a lot of those streets, not all of them, especially on Bern. But this is essentially called the C&I planning area. And to give you some statistics now on how we qualify to be a rehabilitation, conservation, and reconditioning area, there are 1,888 parcels in that boundary that I just showed. 1,047 of those are vacant. That is a 45.54% vacant parcel rate in that community.
I think you misstated that. I think it's 800 that are about vacant. It's 1047 that are developed, it says.
Parcels, okay, I said it backwards. Vacancy rate is 45.54. Half of the parcels have no buildings on them. Again, as I said earlier, the building conditions are variable. The city's done a great job of demolishing dilapidated housing. And you can see that there are 96 active cases going on inside that boundary right now. And contrast that to about 70 that we have throughout the city outside this boundary. We've had 125 nuisance abatement complaints in the past year inside the boundary. That compares to about 450 for the rest of the city. That's 28% of all our complaints emanate from inside this boundary. Crimes. You can see that number there. A little over 20% of the crimes committed in the last 5 years have occurred within this boundary. And when you get down to that last piece, that kind of puts it in perspective. So it's 2.1% of the total land area of the city. It's 10% of the population. We're faced with 20% of the crime, 28% of all the nuisance complaints, more than 100% of all the minimum. That's stated wrong, but a lot more than the rest of the city. 26 more, and we have a vacancy rate. So it really does fit that definition, in that there's plenty of empirical data about vacancy, crime, and how that leads to blighted areas. Well, you can see it in the buildings, you can see it in the community. So based on this data, we are asking that right here is a required action. We are requesting that the Planning and Zoning Board declare that the area known as the C&I planning area, to be a rehabilitation, conservation, and reconditioning area under the state statute right there, 168-500 of the state statutes. So we can begin our planning efforts to reverse all these trends. That is all, Mr. Chair. If you have any questions, of course.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
In the areas that were considered or put into this area, why isn't Pembroke included? It is not a part of the city of New Bern. I noticed that it wasn't in the CNI. I'm not understanding. Is there a particular reason?
Yes.
Okay.
The community didn't request it not to be part of the CNI planning effort, and that was respected, and that request was honored. As we entered into this boundary discussion again during the Redevelopment Commission first few meetings, the alderman for that ward was present for those. We had those discussions, and it was decided at that time again that that Pembroke would not be included in this planning effort.
So you're saying the alderman decided it? And
No,
not the people?
we had discussion, and it was at that time, it was determined. Do you remember the details on Pembroke?
Yes, because part of it was the language, it talks a lot about blighted and what, it was her and it was one other gentleman that was from Pembroke, did not feel like the residents of Pembroke would want their community, a lot of the houses in their community to be labeled blighted, the area to be labeled blighted. And then also, based on the conversations that were had at some of the community meetings that was held in Pembroke when the Housing Authority was thinking about moving to the Carolina Avenue. So all those things were discussed, and so it was just felt at that time that they did not want to do that. But I will say that it did come up, I think all the staff can remember that it did come up that later on that Pembroke would be looked at, that area would be looked at. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Jeff?
The redevelopment commission, with the 10% of the population living in that area, there's going to be massive displacement. It's going to be the responsibility to find housing. Is that under the redevelopment commission?
Well, this isn't an urban renewal project. We're not displacing any residents. Part of one housing program for repair and rehabilitation requires that the Redevelopment Commission create a plan for those citizens who will be displaced.
So
But it's not widespread. We're not going through and it's not a 60s urban renewal. We're not kicking you out and saying, come on back when we build something nicer.
Are you suggesting then that the vacant lots that exist there will be building there, and the hope is to take people within that bounded area to put them in the newer housing in that bounded
Correct,
area?
yeah, that'll be a big part of our housing strategy. 80% of the homes in this community are rental owners, rental occupied. And that is a big issue when you get into rehab and rehabilitation using federal and state funds. They don't really allow you to use those funds on non-owner occupied structures. As we saw, really hit us in the face in the aftermath of Florence. We could not get the resources to the people because they didn't own the homes. It's very easy to deal with that when it's an owner occupied. So the Redevelopment Commission sees that, and our programs will be more tailored towards those renters, essentially. So create more housing, better housing, newer housing for rental occupants.
So for the residents who own their homes in this redevelopment area, how are they addressed? I mean, say they are in somewhat not blighted homes, but homes in need of repair or something like that. Is there anything in the program to address their needs so that they may, stay in the?
We're not done. We haven't created the plan yet, but absolutely part of the plan is fixing up every home.
Okay.
As I probably didn't say clearly enough before, It's really easy for us to fix the 20%. It's the problem is the other 80%. So the redevelopment commission is going to step in and fill that void as far as for the rental. But again, owner occupies is pretty easy. We have programs now for that, and we'll be juicing those up to be more effective.
Do you have an economic level that you're looking at? I mean, say
Yeah.
for your homes and everything?
Yeah.
Do you know what that,
Well, it'll be
the guesstimates of that would be
yeah,
at
it'll
this
be
time?
the probable. And again, this is up to the commission to decide eventually. Ultimately, but it'll probably be somewhere 70 to 80% of area median income.
And
It's usually- and
what would that be in US dollars?
I'm not. Do you know that off the top of your head?
Yes, for the city of Cleveland, it's about 46.5, so there's 70-80% of that, and then for the county, it's like 60-some%, 70-80, but this is the city, so it's about 70-80% of 46,500.
That's what we're looking at,
Down. Yeah.
the cost of, say, a new unit that you would build upon your commission to cost? That would be the price of what you would be? No, that's what I'm asking.
Okay.
I mean,
So you're asking what price we'll be selling homes?
Yeah,
for?
what
I
would you-
don't really know that answer. Selling homes is a tricky thing. Not sure if that's something we want to get into now. Renting homes is easy. Selling homes, that's what Habitat does. So we're partnering up with Habitat for a lot of our housing because they handle the end, homeowner. We don't need another program to be building homes for homeowners. We need a program to be building homes for renters. So
For
Habitat-
renters,
for renters, yes, sir.
that's your market right now, renters?
Again, like I said, we haven't created the plan yet, but that's what we're looking at. Yes, sir.
Does your plan do anything to improve the infrastructure? I mean, because this area right here, this is one of the most flooded areas in New Bern, so I can't see you going $20-30 million in this area, and then it floods every year or every other year.
Yeah.
I mean, is that being looked at also?
Yep, absolutely is being looked at. We talk about that a lot at the commission level. And there's a few options available to us, and they'll be in the plan.
So this right here is just to
Boundary,
get your boundaries set?
correct.
Right. So that is the item that is before us tonight. And we've transitioned from item A of new business to item B when we pass that slide. And so,
I think a lot of times that's what we do. We just come and we get what you want without knowing what we're getting.
well, and so
that's
that's why we've
that's a
got,
problem with me making educated or informed consent or an
Sure.
opinion.
and that's.
I only know what
precisely
you
why-
want to do, but I don't know what you're going to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've said it quite a few times now, and I'll be very clear. We don't have a plan. We are in the process of making the plan.
Well,
So-
I would like to see that plan before I vote on whether I want it to be.
All right. Well,
Because-
that's not the way the process is set up,
Yeah?
unfortunately.
So,
Yeah.
so the way the process is in the
Yeah.
general statutes is, so we have to define the area first.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
I
then
understand.
once the area is defined,
Then we
then
can,
the redevelopment
come back
commission
and talk about all the
develops a
plan and
plan,
stuff.
then that plan comes back before
Okay.
us.
Yeah.
before it
So we
goes to
will
the
see
Board
it
of-
again.
So we'll see
Thank you very much.
we'll see the plan before it
Okay.
goes to the Board of Aldermen.
Yeah.
And Chairman, may I say?
Certainly.
Again, I am Theresa Lee, and I am the chairman. I've worked in this community, that boundary there for over 30 years. I worked for the city of Newton for over 25. Our organization put 7-8 houses there. I walk the streets there. I have kin people over there. I know a lot of the people over there around this city. So we understand the affordable housing need. I can guarantee you that. We understand the infrastructure need. We understand the curb and gutter need. Not only that, we understand a whole lot of needs, the food desert and all of that. And I can almost guarantee you that a lot of those things will be addressed. Can you make it all perfect? No. But there's a lot of it that you can do through this redevelopment plan. It's just another tool. That's what it is. It is just another tool. But I say to you, and a lot of the people on the commission understand the plan as well. Not only the plan, what needs to be done, but they understand the area. And they understand that it's about people's lives. It's not just a piece of paper when you put on on the shelf. And every single plan that's been done in the last 5 years says the exact same thing. It ain't nothing new. And so everybody knows what needs to be done. But just like Nike says it right now, I just put it to you plainly. Let's just do it.
I got a question. Does this operate somewhat like a block grant?
Well, I mean, the most exciting thing about the Redevelopment Commission is you can spend money, you can make money, you can invest money. All these other plans can't do anything like that. So the tools are actually in the funding, which has been lacking for till now. See, I guess to answer your question, yes, you can leverage CDBG funds. We can use CDBG funds, which we're doing right now. We're allocating $200,000 in our CDBG plan to build up to 4 or 5 houses. I don't know, it won't be 5, but the language is loose so we don't get caught. To build up to 5 houses for rental uses in this area. So we're in that process right now.
So, square footage of a house,
Yep.
a minimum and maximum is established? Or,
Good question. No, I mean these are all the land use and zoning questions that we need to talk about.
gotcha. Never mind.
That would be part of the plan.
Yeah.
Yes, I think in my research, the most exciting thing that sounds like this for me is this is not just another study. It's
Yeah.
not just another report
It's an
that the
implementation
city
plan.
will have
It's
to
an
talk,
active plan.
actually takes action and can do the things that Jeff has reviewed tonight. And the commission can actually, buy property, sell property, do all these things and make things happen rather than just another study that's a report that goes on a
Yeah.
shelf somewhere.
And when they do this will secure, can this secure or protect individuals who own the property, or will they, is there protection for people who presently own the property, or what? I don't know how
Well,
to pose what I'm
Yeah,
trying to say.
I mean, property rights are not changed.
Okay, so
So, yeah,
ownership is not easily lost. Ownership is more. Is this more about we're trying to make it for people to retain their property and upkeep, or is this a backdoor method that it can be removed from them and someone else can buy it?
Oh no, that doesn't sound right to me.
Of course it doesn't. That's why I put it out there because it is a
No,
problem.
that's
Yeah.
not part of it. It's redevelopment. It's just like it said,
Making it better.
redevelopment, making the area better. If you live over there or if you walk through there, every citizen in the city of Newton should hold their head down because it just shouldn't be. It just shouldn't be, and it's our job. It's our job. It's just it doesn't have anything to do with taking anybody's property. And I'm not saying not gonna take anybody's property, but there might be some property that you might want to take. I'm not
Because
saying
some
anybody
people
to-
are just irresponsible with property. I mean,
well, not so much that, but in order to benefit the most, you might have to straighten the street out, or you might have to move it over here. You might have to.
Yeah, that's the eminent domain
Yeah,
that
yeah. But that's
Jeff was
a
talking about.
process. That's a
Yes.
process.
Yeah, we've skipped over Marshall. He's got a question.
Oh,
Let me just ask a question. Is the Stanley White Gym included in this?
it is part of the redevelopment
It is part
commission area, but the board of aldermen will take care of that, and then whatever needs that our decision, it will come to us. But it stays with the board of aldermen till they decide what they're gonna do, and then it comes to us. We're not in it until they're here, and we're here.
The
But
city
it
already
is in
owns,
the area, yes.
city already owns that, so
Yes.
they already have control of that.
Oh, they do? Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, the city already owns
But
that.
it's
so-
in the boundary, yes.
You said you're into rental usage. Would the occupants be given the opportunity to rent to own, or would that trickle down later on in the process? Or would these units specifically be just renters?
No, well, right now, the ones that we are in the process of trying to build, I guess, allocate the money to build, those are specifically for rentals. Part of the housing strategy, again, thinking of the continuum of ownership, you go from rental rent to own maybe, to, owner occupied. And that middle piece is something that we talk about. It's possible. It makes perfect sense. So, but it gets into a lot of accounting issues on the back end, making sure that people are staying in that income level. But we can, again, like I said, we can put deed restrictions on the transfer of the property that remain affordable. There's plenty of models on other agencies throughout the state that do that, as they build homes for people and sell homes to people at low income. As their income rises and they sell, they get to keep a chunk of that equity, but the overall price of the home stays within a certain range of affordability. These are all things that really work.
Who would own these rentals? Who would own the rentals? Say it like, yeah, who would own them?
The 5 units, they'll, ultimately owned by the Redevelopment Commission.
Who would own most of the vacant lots you have? You have how many vacant lots?
Redevelopment Commission.
So when they build on these lots, do the Redevelopment Commission own the unit that you build on the vacant lots? That's who owns it?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Again, to keep the standard up, right? Take ownership of the problem. The problem is the rentals. Redevelopment Commission owns it. We'll keep it to
And how
good
will?
standards.
Okay, never mind.
So I think one thing that might be helpful, Jeff, is to explain to the board what sorts of things from the commission would be coming back before our board. So once the plan is developed, it'll come back to our board.
Correct.
We'll review it. We'll
Yep.
recommend approval or changes or whatever.
Yep.
It'll go to Board of Aldermen. It'll be approved, with, we think. Then at that point, the commission is off and running. So I think that what might be helpful is beyond that, what sort of things, like rezoning would come back before us if the commission. makes a
So there'll be a
rezoning.
land use plan associated with that we'll recommend. I mean, a lot of people get confused that when we create these plans, it should all be done at the same time.
Right.
A lot of the plan is to say, go ahead and create that program. So we have some other issues, we have some other policies like that are creating programs for renters specifically. But that would also, part of the plan will also be land use changes. So that'll be outlined in, we have to make these changes. So then those changes will come back before this board as a land use amendment.
Yeah, and I guess that's what I was trying to get at is even though we're obviously not on the commission, we're going to see things periodically that come from the commission and come before us for either approval or recommendation of
We
approval
can do
from
a
the
yearly,
Board of Aldermen.
we can do a yearly presentation, status report or something. We can put that in the plan.
Now, you will have the opportunity to address some fire safety issues. We've heard, many of us been reviewing land use ordinance in regard to street widths and whatnot, and we understand that there's a serious problem with access for fire trucks back there and whatnot. Will this redevelopment board be able to address those issues to improve public safety by widening roads or
I mean, it can, right? But one of the requirements from the state for the plan is that it has a financial feasibility kind of addendum that goes with it. That may be outside the realm of, and it has to be, we have to give a timeline to do it. Widening streets has been met with a little bit of not as much fanfare as you would think, but there are other ways that we can handle the transportation network. A lot of these homes are on the streets, right? So go down Main Street, right? It's 22 feet wide or is it 19 feet wide? Do you remember how wide Main Street is? Anyways, it's narrow.
Tight is a good one.
Yeah, tight is, either way, it's supposed to be a 2-lane road, but 2 cars can't really pass. So when you get into the widening issues, what's it going to be widened to? Are you even going to make enough width there to make it? Are we going to take 5 feet on each side? I mean, it really gets into an expensive proposition. But our transportation plan will, and we have to have a transportation plan. We'll address that.
Well, I was addressing public safety, not
Yeah, well,
transportation.
yep, absolutely.
You anticipate?
We haven't talked about it yet.
You
really.
anticipate any more areas, or is this going to be?
This is the only area.
So to that end, if I understand correctly, Jeff, once this boundary is set, it doesn't change, or you
Correct.
start the
Oh,
process over.
Yeah, you start the process over, yeah.
Right, the entire process, right?
Correct,
So, yeah.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
If you you go into choicenewbern.com, you will see public safety in the C&I plan, and some of those things are addressed. If
Yeah.
you go, if, you know, at your
That's a
leisure
tough one.
sometime, because like I said, the streets and stuff, they're very, very narrow, but it was talked about in public safety about that.
And you get into these planning, you don't wanna do, you wanna do what you can do. It's pretty
Right.
expensive, you don't wanna just put it in and make wider streets and it really not be feasible. We're trying to keep, there's a lot we can do, and we're narrowing our efforts, which are pretty wide anyways, to stuff that we are gonna do. That we think we have the funding to do in a reasonable amount of time.
But what you're suggesting is that it will be improved somewhat.
Oh, absolutely. Like, we're establishing a kind of a network of, like a transportation hierarchy, where you would have your major thoroughfares, your
Right.
collectors, and your
Good.
local streets. So we'll be planning around that idea.
So it will be improved.
It will be improved, yes, sir. Widening major strategically in certain areas where it's
Good.
feasible,
That's what I was
but not
getting
a
towards.
broad swath of
No.
taking 35 homes and doing that stuff.
Not a 10th Street project, huh?
Sidewalks and gutters.
Sidewalks, yes, ma'am. We're gonna look individually, I've talked to a lot of engineers about the drainage issues, and everyone says curb and gutter is gonna solve all the problems, but it's very difficult and very expensive proposition to go in and retro a curb and gutter. It changes the grading of the entire area. So, we'll be looking at it individually as the city has its own paving plan that goes through this neighborhood, this area. I want to be able to look at before they go in and pave, to do some kind of study too. And I'm getting into the planning stuff that my commission hasn't even really talked about yet. But you're asking me the question, so I'm gonna try to give you the best answer and where we're leaning. And that maybe make it so there's maybe a mini kind of feasibility analysis on, does it make sense to curb and gutter here? Will it work? Does it go anywhere? We have a larger drainage issue that we're working on. And curb and gutter may be a part of that, but we gotta understand the entire basin and the drainage, and if it can be fixed before we go in and invest large sums of money to curb and gutter. It's really not gonna solve any problems.
Not especially if all the water's going right down in that area.
Yeah, I mean, curb and gutter, really, if you don't grade it right, the water will just run right back into the home.
Right.
Yeah, so, this is kind of
We done
Or
had
to a
that.
place that was never even affected to start.
correct, yeah,
Just move the problem.
yeah.
Okay, are there any other questions for Mr. Ruggieri or Mrs. Lee? And perfectly okay if there are, and then once we're satisfied we've asked all the questions we want, I'm gonna open this for public comment. I'm not sure we have anybody here that would like to speak, but I'm gonna open it anyway, so that we're following all the rules. But don't let me discourage you from asking questions. That was not my intent. Okay, well, hearing at this time, what I will do is I will open this item for public comment. And is there anyone that'd like to speak about this item? If so, please come forward to the podium and clearly state your name and address for the record. Okay, seeing none, at this time, I will close the public comment and we'll bring it back to the board for any further discussion before I entertain a motion. Do we have any further discussion or any more questions for that matter?
Not at this time. I like the comment.
Truly, what's before us is all about the boundaries, so
Correct.
unless someone wants to add or subtract, there's really, most of the beef of this will come back at a later point.
Correct. I think
Real
that is
interesting,
correct.
I like it.
And there's been a great deal of work, the C&I study in particular, that has identified this boundary that we have before us. Okay, hearing no further discussion, at this time I'll entertain a motion.
I would like to introduce a motion to approve the boundary plan for the urban redevelopment area.
Okay, we have a motion. I hear a second, so all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that is all of our new business. My understanding that there was one item that Mr. Black would like to talk
Yeah,
about.
I have been concerned for some time now that we've approved massive developments, or the potential of massive developments. And it's come to my attention that this zoning board, through statute 113A, can make certain kind of guidelines for certain size developments, require an environmental impact study, whereupon before we approve a very large plan, and this planning board can set guidelines for that, whether or not a zoning plan would have 500 residential units in it, or a commercial plan would have, 2 million square feet in it. At some point, we can have guidelines where an environmental impact study that we could have the guidelines of be conducted before the plans go forward, so we have better filled on what would a large residential planning do to local schools, local fire, local police, sewage capacity, things like that. The impact on the environment could also be an issue.
I presume the developer would be responsible for the...
We are responsible for setting the guidelines where it's done, and we would need further review of the law as well. Some of it would obviously be done by the planning department. They have the tools and whatnot to determine what the thing is, but this would give us a little bit more time to review a very large development. Obviously, this is not intended for a 25-unit plot or building a little strip mall on the edge of town. This is designed for these massive developments that we've been encumbered with, that are in New Bern as well as in TJ. And I think it's something that this board should look at and review, and as we have control of the land use ordinance, and if we think it's practical and it's in the best interest of New Bern. Otherwise, we might just have unbridled development going everywhere, and it would give us a chance to pause and reflect before we go forward with these massive developments with the same amount of review we give, whether it's a small or a large one.
So you're suggesting...
that we do a study on this statute for large developments, whether it be commercial or residential.
Okay.
To have
To the end, right, and to the end of proposing ordinance language change, is that?
It would be designed for an ordinance language change, as well as when to require an environmental impact study. And my understanding of the law right now is we can determine what needs to be in that before we, so when the information is given to us, we determine that the impact is either problematic or not a problem.
So perhaps the way forward, and obviously we'll have to get staff involved, is to have a subcommittee with three or less of our board members, and then we may choose to, and it may be the recommendation of staff to involve some developers. That would seem to be the right thing to do.
And as such a change in land use ordinance would also require the board of aldermen to vote on it.
Certainly. Yeah, when we get to that point, I think it's, at this point, we're talking about a committee to have these discussions, and then along with staff, suggest, language changes or ordinance changes.
Don, that ordinance that you're reading from, is that a state?
Yes, it's a state ordinance.
So that's the general statute.
It's a general statute.
That's what I wrote down.
And the statute is in chapter 113A.
Okay.
And and in section 113A-8 and the subsection, it gives the planning board of each entity the ability to change the land use ordinance to adopt the wind requirements. It's optional whether we want to do it or not.
Sure.
But we can set certain guidelines when it kicks in. So let's say if somebody has like a 300-acre parcel and they want to have it zoned where you could put 30 or 40 units on each parcel. Well, you're talking 1,200 units. So maybe we could say, when you exceed 500 units, this is entirely on the board's discretion what they approve. An environmental impact study should be done.
But don't we normally do that?
No,
The
not
env-
really.
So we don't do the environmental impact when we do something with that number or already?
They're not doing that presently, is my understanding. The planning department reviews it, and they say it's a go or not go.
Well, if you were simply talking about environmental, and when you said that
We
word,
determine the word environment could be the impact of schools. The environment is not necessarily just green space. Environment is everything, both
It's all
the
things.
human condition and the natural condition.
well, we certainly do look at, of course, when you say environmental, I think like wetlands. We certainly
I'm not
make sure
saying-
that's taken care of.
Right.
But maybe what we're saying is, when fire takes a look at it, and the school system takes a look at the development during,
We will know what the
departmental
impact is. And if that's done beforehand, then the local community would be better informed what the impacts would be too. It'll also include road traffic. And it's part of the statute, and I think we should review it.
So let me ask staff this. Any objection to having a motion and a vote to form a committee to study the application of General Statute 113A as it applies to the city of New Bern? I mean, I realize that's creating more work for everybody, but
Well,
That's what they
As a
hired
means
to do.
we can
of,
certainly
that's-
look into it. I do not know 113A off the top of my head,
yeah, nor do I.
but if that's something that the board would like to look into, so long as there's no objection.
Yeah.
As long as there's no objection.
Yeah, obviously, absolutely fine. If the board wants to do that. I just read through the statute, and the only hook is you can't do anything that's state and federal requirements already, so we have to do something more. And I don't know what that more could be.
Right. We can exceed the minimum that the state requires, right?
No. If the state requires a permit for something, that's it. The state or the federal government, that is good enough. We
But
can't do anything, we have to do something besides what they do.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that is, but
Well,
absolutely
I-
willing to talk.
Yeah, I don't think, I know either,
Yeah.
Jeff, and so maybe that's, so I think it would be reasonable to form a committee, and I'd be my suggestion to have Mr. Black lead that subcommittee. And, ultimately, the findings of that committee may be that we don't need to do anything.
Sure.
That we've already
No,
got
it's interesting.
things in place. Or it may be that the suggestion is we change something in the ordinance. And so that, my thought is, since we've got this on the table before us talking about it now, we can sit here and talk in circles, but obviously I don't think any of us have looked at the
Yeah.
statute other than maybe Mr. Black. And so talking about it in this, right now in this public forum is probably not very productive. And so it may be that we would want to form that committee, in which case staff can assist, and
Sure.
if we want to get developers or members of the community involved in that committee, we can do that. We've done that for other, committees. Just a thought.
Yeah, and that's under environmental. That's irrespective of transportation impacts.
Right.
But again, like you said, we're standing here. spitballing.
Well, again, I don't know the general statute that we're talking about, so I can't begin to speak intelligently about it, so.
All right, thank you.
I would wonder if it's a bit premature to form a study group of sorts. I'd like to read it first and be a lot more familiar with it before I would agree.
That's reasonable as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd just like to understand it.
I think that's part of the whole process, though, is to understand. The only concern I have is we are approving such massive developments lately. What is the impact to the local surroundings and whatnot? And the only idea I have here is that we will be better informed on a large development. We will have more resources before us.
Sure, I think I understand the concern.
Instead of coming back to fix it later.
Yeah.
Well, so is it your, assertion that an environmental impact study, and again, I'm vaguely familiar with what that entails. I don't, do we think
There's
that,
no definition in the statute that I saw for us at the planning department, what the environmental impact study would require. It's not like an environment, it doesn't have to be like an environmental impact study to build a road through a bypass or whatnot.
correct, I guess what I'm getting at is what is the meat of an environmental impact study? I don't know that it would, does it deal with schools like you mentioned earlier, or is it simply environmental?
No, that's what I'm saying, we can define it. So, I mean, I read the environmental condition as both the impact to humans, communities, as well as any kind of natural things. Obviously, we can't build on wetlands in the same way.
I
Well,
think we're looking more toward just
But
impact.
there's a permit process for wetlands, and in
Yeah,
particular,
yeah,
there's a permit
yeah,
process
yeah.
for that,
And we're not
and
gonna
we
be
want to get in the middle of that, right?
So what I'm more concerned about is the impact to the human condition in our area.
All right, so I guess one of two things. I kind of like Mr. Walker's idea is since I'm not familiar, and I suspect most of us here are not familiar with that general statute, is perhaps we do a little research first and make sure that we think that's a good idea, and we
If
can
you want
enlist
to
staff
form
to
like a
help us.
little informal study group, are we allowed to do that?
As long as we have a limit of numbers of board members that can serve, I don't recall what it is. Is it 3?
It should be 3 or 4.
3.
5 could constitute a quorum if we had a vacancy.
Right. Okay.
And that study group would decide whether or not to go forward or not. We just limited it at that point.
Yeah, in conjunction with staff. I think that's important that staff has to be involved
That
in this
would be
process.
Because they're more familiar with the process.
Yes. Okay. So I don't have a problem with as long as staff doesn't object, and it didn't sound like Mr. Ruggieri did. If we have a motion to form a committee to study, again, I think this, to study the application of General Statute 113A as it applies to the city of New Bern and the land use ordinance.
That's good.
Okay. So having said that, I'll entertain a motion.
At this point, I would like to introduce a motion to form a study group or commission to study the impact of Chapter 113A of the North Carolina General Statutes concerning an environmental impact study addition to the City of New Bern land use ordinance.
Okay. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay.
Aye. No, nay.
Nay. All right. So the motion carries. And what I would ask you to do, Don, is I presume that you brought this up, that you're going to head up that study committee. And what I'd ask you to do is talk to staff, and then after that discussion, you can enlist some of your fellow board members to join you on this.
Okay.
Okay? Thank you. Okay, any other discussion before I entertain a motion to adjourn? Okay, hearing none, at this time I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
At this point, I'd like to introduce a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Okay, we have a motion.
Second.
Here's some seconds. So, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned.